In this episode of B.Hooked Crochet, we're going to learn how to crochet the moss stitch. My name is Brittany, and I can't wait to teach you how to work this really versatile stitch. For the supplies list and written instructions, please visit bhookedcrochet.com/moss. Let's get started. To begin any project that uses the moss stitch or the granite stitch, you're going to want to chain a total number that is a multiple of 2 or an even number. So for this little swatch I'm just going to chain 18. Now what we first need to do is start our foundation chain. So this part isn't actually going to be included in the pattern multiple. So we're just going to repeat a couple of rows to create this stitch pattern. This row is not going to be included in that repeat. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the second chain from the hook. So we have our first chain right here next to it and the second chain right down here. So first chain, second chain. We're going to insert our hook into that second chain and make a single crochet. And we'll chain 1. We'll skip the next chain, so this guy right here, and we'll single crochet into the next. And that's our really simple repeat for this row. We'll chain 1, skip 1, single crochet in the next. We'll just repeat this until we get to the end of our foundation chain. Now once you've made it to the end of your chain here, you can see I just have a couple of stitches left. I'm chaining 1, skipping 1, and my last chain needs to have a single crochet. So that's how it should end up, with a single crochet in your last chain right there next to your slip knot. If that's not the case for you, you might want to just rip back your work. Hopefully you didn't have a really large chain to start out with. But if that happens, there can be a couple of problems. One, you could have had an odd number of chains, so you could have miscounted during that initial process, or you just somehow messed things up somewhere within the work. So you'll want to double check and make sure that you're skipping a chain every time you chain 1. Row 2 is going to begin our stitch pattern repeat. So like I said before, we're going to repeat the same 2 rows over and over until our project reaches the size that we want. We're going to start with row 2. We want to chain 1. We'll turn our work. We're going to locate that first single crochet. So it was actually the last stitch from our foundation row. We want to make a single crochet into that stitch. And then we want to find our chain 1 space, which is right here. We're going to single crochet into that as well. Now we'll chain 1, we'll skip the next single crochet, we'll locate that next chain 1 gap space, and single crochet there. Now I know this part can get a little bit difficult to see where you're supposed to work. Those single crochets are a little hard to find because they're such short stitches. Now what I suggest is just kind of open your work up like this. You can see the little holes from your chain 1 space. That's typically what I focus on when I'm working this stitch pattern. Is I'll just feel for those openings, because you're not going to be able to put your hook through the single crochet. I mean, you probably could if you really tried, but the point is you'd have to really try. So you'll just chain 1, you'll feel around for that open space and single crochet there. So we'll just work in this stitch pattern until we reach the end of the row. So I'm making a single crochet into my last chain one space. And I want to finish off the round by making a single crochet in the very last stitch. And this stitch can be difficult to find just because it's right on the end. But if you turn it up to the top, you can see the V of the stitch. We're going to make a single crochet into the last stitch. Now moving on to row 3, it's technically row 3 because we have our foundation row, but it's the second row in our stitch pattern repeat. So we'll chain 1, we'll turn our work, we'll find the first single crochet, so that first stitch right here, single crochet into that. We'll chain 1, we're going to skip the next single crochet. So remember, to end off the row, we had a single crochet in the chain 1 space and then a single crochet in the last stitch. So we have 2 side by side. That's going to set us up for this row. We did a single crochet, we'll chain 1, we'll skip that one. Then locate your chain 1 space and single crochet there. Chain 1, skip a single crochet, and then single crochet in the next chain 1 space. So when you think about it, the moss stitch or the granite stitch, all we're doing is we're alternating single crochets and chain stitches, right? So we're doing that and we're offsetting them so that they occur in between rather than on top of each other. But where this pattern can sort of trip you up is on the edges. At least it did for me when I was first learning this stitch, because the edges are just a little bit different. We have to work them differently so that we can have a straight, flat edge on either side. Now when you come to the end of row 3, you're just going to continue working in your pattern. So we have 2 single crochets side by side here. We'll chain 1, we'll skip that first one, and then we'll single crochet in the last stitch. So now all you would do at this point is repeat the last 2 rows over and over until your project reaches the size that you want. So just focus on rows 2 and rows 3. You can find those written instructions at bhookedcrochet.com/moss, and you'll just focus in on row 2 and row 3. Those are going to be your repeats. So we've just finished a row 3, so we're going to start a row 2. So we'll chain 1, we'll turn our work, single crochet into the first stitch, then single crochet into the chain 1 space, and then start our stitch pattern repeat. So that's chain 1, skip 1, single crochet into the next. And I don't want to confuse you. I keep using stitch pattern repeat and row repeats interchangeably, and that's not typically the case. So a stitch pattern repeat is going to be what you repeat across the row. So what we're doing here, chain 1, skip 1, and a row repeat is what we repeat row after row to create the pattern. So our stitch repeat for this stitch, for the moss stitch, is single crochet, chain 1, single crochet, and we have a couple of different things going on the ends. The row repeat is rows 2 and row 3. Okay, I just want to make that distinction. I don't want to confuse you at all. Repeats can be a little bit much for you to wrap your brain around, especially if you're newer to crochet. And I do have a couple of resources available on that if you are struggling to read patterns and you're interested in learning more about that. You can check out my new podcast. I'm doing a segment called Master Crochet Patterns. And in that segment, we talk about repeats. So we'll talk about everything I just mentioned here, but in a lot more detail. And you can find that if you just search for the B.Hooked podcast on iTunes for Apple users and Stitcher for Android users. Now we've just covered that row 2 once more. And again, we would just start now with row 3. So we'll chain 1. We will single crochet into the first stitch, and then we'll begin our repeat. So chain 1, skip 1, single crochet into the chain space. So as I mentioned before, you'll just repeat these 2 rows over and over until your project reaches the right length. So if you're working on a scarf or a washcloth, a towel, anything like that, this stitch is really great for those types of projects. As you can see, as you're working this up, it's relatively thin. It creates a thin fabric, which is pretty unique for crochet. As you know, crochet is typically a lot thicker than, say, knitting. But I really do like this stitch for a lot of different types of projects. It can be great for those that I just mentioned, you know, towels, washcloths, and dishcloths. But it's really great for clothing elements, wearables, so scarves, because it does have a lot of movement to it. And that's something to consider when you're designing or you're planning a project with this stitch.